that they had nothing left, that the retirement savings were gone, that the mortgage on their place in Kelowna had drained them, that there was simply no money to spare. My in-laws looked me in the eye across their kitchen table and told me they could not help us. And I believed them. I believed them for 3 years. My husband's name was Patrick. He was 34 years old when he was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia, and he was 36 when he died. We had been married for 5 years. We had a daughter named Ren, who had just turned 2 when he got sick, and she was 4 when we buried him in a small cemetery outside of Kamloops on a Thursday in October, with the leaves coming down orange and gold like it was trying to be beautiful on purpose. Like the sky didn't know what had just happened to us. I am not going to make this about Patrick's death. I have already lived that. I am going to tell you about what happened after. Patrick was sick for almost 2 years before he died. The first round of chemo was in Vancouver General. We drove down from Kamloops with Ren in her car seat and a bag of clothes, and we didn't really come home for 6 weeks. I was working as a dental hygienist at a clinic in the North Shore, and my manager, a woman I will always be grateful for, held my position open for 11 weeks. 11 weeks. She didn't have to do that. The treatment wasn't covered fully. People in Canada think everything is covered. Some things are. The hospital stay, the chemo, the blood work. Yes, but the drugs that came after the first remission, the targeted therapy, the antifungal medications that cost $400 a bottle, the parking at Vancouver General, which was $30 a day, the hotel we had to stay in because we couldn't afford to commute. None of that was covered. Our extended benefits through my work covered 60% of prescription costs up to a cap. We hit that cap in February. It was only February. We were borrowing money from friends. I set up a GoFundMe and I hated every minute of it. Hated asking, hated the feeling of being someone people felt sorry for. But people gave. People we barely knew gave. A woman from my high school, who I hadn't spoken to in 12 years, sent $200 and wrote, "You don't know me anymore, but Patrick sounds like a good man." I still think about that. I called my mother-in-law in November of that first year. Patrick was in his second round of treatment, and things were not looking good, and I needed $20,000 to cover the gap in a clinical trial cost share at BC Cancer, a trial that his oncologist said gave him a real shot. $20,000. I wasn't asking for a gift. I said we could sign something, a promissory note. Whatever they wanted, we would pay them back. My father-in-law got on the phone. He was calm. He said they wished they could help. He said the Kelowna property had been more expensive than expected to maintain, that their CPP and OAS barely covered their monthly expenses, that they had already helped Patrick's sister Meredith with some things over the years, and it had left them thin. He said they were sorry. He said he hopes things turned out okay. Patrick didn't get into the trial. He died 14 months later. I won't describe the months after Patrick died, because I don't have the right words for them, and I'm not sure I ever will. I had Ren. I had my job. I had a small life insurance payout that covered the funeral and let me keep the apartment in Kamloops for another year while I got back on my feet. My own parents flew in from Halifax and stayed for 3 weeks, and my mother slept on the couch and made soup every day like soup was the only thing standing between me and complete collapse. Maybe it was. I kept a cordial relationship with my in-laws because Ren was their granddaughter and Patrick would have wanted that. My mother-in-law sent birthday cards. We did Christmas video calls. I drove Ren down to Kelowna twice a year. It was civil. It was surface. I was carrying something underneath it that I didn't have a name for yet. The name came 2.5 years after Patrick died, at a backyard barbecue at my sister-in-law's new property in West Kelowna. Meredith had bought a house. Not an apartment, a house. A 4-bedroom with a covered deck, and a double garage and one of those big, sloped backyards that look out over the lake. I knew she'd bought it. She'd mentioned it on the family group chat, posted photos, said she and her partner were so thrilled. I assumed she'd gotten a mortgage. Meredith had a good job, worked in municipal planning for the regional district. I didn't think much of it. I was standing in her kitchen helping to slice watermelon when her partner came in and made some comment to Meredith about the gift. Something like, "We really should frame something for your parents, the down payment gift, something on the wall." He was joking. Meredith laughed and said, "Oh my God, stop." And then she saw my face. She looked at me and I looked at her and the entire kitchen went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with sound. "How much?" I said. I don't know why that was the first thing I said. Not what, not when. How much? Meredith put down her glass. She said, "Addie, it was a loan." "How much, Meredith?" She told me it was $85,000. 85,000. 85,000. Given to her 18 months before Patrick died. While he was in treatment, while we were $200 over our credit limit, and I was rationing his anti-nausea medication because we couldn't fill the full prescription that month. I left the barbecue. I put Ren in the car and I drove back to Kamloops, and I didn't speak to anyone from that family for 6 weeks. I want to be clear about something. I am not a person who believes that parents owe their adult children money. I believe people get to choose what to do with their own savings. I believe in autonomy. These are things I actually think. But I also believe that if you look someone in the eye and tell them you have nothing, while secretly giving $85,000 to someone else in the same family, you have not made a financial decision. You have made a choice about who matters. And I had spent 2 years believing that choice was made because they had nothing to give. They had plenty to give, they just didn't give it to Patrick. I spent those 6 weeks in something I can only describe as a slow burn. Not the hot kind of anger that makes you say things you regret, but the cold, steady kind that lives behind your sternum and changes the way you see everything. I went back through every memory of those 2 years. Every phone call where my father-in-law sounded so sympathetic. Every card my mother-in-law sent with little notes, like, "We're praying for you both." Every time I had apologized for asking, had said, "I know it's hard for everyone. I'm sorry to even bring it up." I had apologized for asking them to save their son's life. I kept working. I kept taking Ren to daycare and making dinners and being a functional person, because Ren needed me to be functional. But I also started letting myself feel the full weight of what they had done, and the full weight of what I had lost because of it. About 8 months after that barbecue, I got a call from Meredith. My father-in-law had collapsed at home. He was in Kelowna General with what turned out to be a serious cardiac event, a spontaneous coronary artery dissection, which is different from a regular heart attack and much harder to treat. He'd been stabilized, but the cardiologist said he needed a specific procedure, and the wait list at Kelowna General was months long. But there was a private surgical facility in Calgary that could take him within 3 weeks. The cost out of pocket was $62,000. My mother-in-law called me herself, 2 days later. I hadn't spoken to her in almost a year. She cried. She said she knew things had been strained. She said she didn't know how to say she was sorry, that she'd been thinking about Patrick every day, that she knew what she and my father-in-law had done wasn't right, and she'd been living with it. She said they needed help. They had taken out a line of credit against the Kelowna property, but they were still short. They were asking me because I was family, because Ren was their granddaughter, because they didn't know who else to call. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after she stopped talking. Here's what I thought about. I thought about a Tuesday in March, 3 years ago, when Patrick had a fever of 39.8, and I couldn't reach his oncology nurse line, and I sat on the bathroom floor of our Vancouver hotel room with Ren asleep in the next room, and I Googled, what happens when AML patient fever doesn't break at 2 in the morning? I thought about the GoFundMe page. I thought about my high school friend who I barely knew anymore, who sent $200 because Patrick sounded like a good man. I thought about the promissory note I had offered, the mortgage paperwork I had said I would sign, the "we wish we could," and the "we're stretched so thin." And then I thought about something else. I thought about Ren, who is almost 6 now, and who had her father's eyes and his laugh and his way of tilting her head slightly when she was thinking hard about something. I thought about the fact that these were her grandparents, that Patrick had loved his father in the uncomplicated way that some children love their parents, without reservations, without auditing, that Patrick would not have wanted me to make this decision from the place I was currently sitting in. I told my mother-in-law I needed 2 weeks. I talked to my own therapist, who I had been seeing since Patrick died. I talked to my mother in Halifax. I talked to my best friend Zoe, who had been with me through all of it and who said very carefully, "Whatever you decide, I'll support it. But I want you to make sure you're deciding for you, not against them." I thought that was the smartest thing anyone said to me during those 2 weeks. I called a financial advisor, not because I had $62,000 sitting around. I didn't. But because I wanted to understand what was possible, what I could actually contribute without putting Ren's future at risk. My TFSA had grown over the past few years. I had been careful. I was not rich, but I was stable in the way that someone who has been through financial terror becomes stable, methodical, cautious, always with a buffer. I could contribute $15,000, not as a gift. I called my mother-in-law back on a Thursday morning. I told her I would contribute $15,000. I told her I was doing it because Ren loved her grandparents, and because Patrick had loved his father, and because I had chosen to be someone who acts from her values rather than her wounds. And then I said one more thing. I said, I need you to understand that I know about the $85,000. I've known for almost a year. I'm not bringing it up to punish you or to have a fight. I'm bringing it up because I need you to sit with it. I need you to actually sit with it. I need you to actually sit with what happened. And I need you to tell me, not now, not today, but at some point before you leave this earth, that you understand what you did to your son. My mother-in-law didn't speak for almost a full minute. When she did, she was crying in a different way than before. Not the kind of crying that's asking for something, the other kind. She said, I know. My father-in-law had the procedure in Calgary. He is recovering. I am not going to tell you that we are close now, or that anything is fully repaired, because that would not be true, and I have no interest in a tidy ending. My mother-in-law sent me a letter in January, a real letter, handwritten, 4 pages, that said things I will keep to myself because they belong to me, and to Ren, and to Patrick's memory. I read it twice, and then I put it in the shoebox where I keep the things that matter. I still think about those 2 years sometimes. About the hotel parking lot at Vancouver General, and the months we ate pasta 4 nights a week because it was cheap and filling and Patrick could sometimes keep it down. I think about the GoFundMe. I think about the Tuesday on the bathroom floor. But I also think about who I am now. I think about the fact that I did not become the thing that was done to me. I think about Ren watching me navigate an impossible situation and what she is quietly learning from that. Even at 6, even though she doesn't have words for it yet. I don't know if I forgave them. I'm not sure forgiveness is the right frame. I think what I did was decide that I wasn't going to let their failure define my story. Patrick's story, or mine, or Ren's. Every morning, I make Ren's lunch, and I drive her to school, and sometimes on the drive back, I roll down the window even in the cold, because the air in Kamloops in the early morning smells clean in a way that feels like it means something. I don't know exactly what it means, something. But I keep rolling down the window anyway. There is a moment I keep coming back to. I am standing in Meredith's kitchen in West Kelowna with a piece of watermelon in my hand, and the whole world is rearranging itself around a single sentence I just overheard. $85,000. And I think about how long I had spent apologizing for asking, how carefully I had worded every phone call, every email, every request, making sure I didn't sound demanding, didn't sound ungrateful, didn't make anyone uncomfortable. I had been so concerned with being reasonable that I never stopped to ask whether what was being done to me was reasonable at all. That is the thing about being betrayed quietly. It doesn't announce itself. It just lives underneath everything, invisible, until one day you're standing in someone's kitchen and you finally see the shape of it. I don't think what happened to Patrick and me was random. I think the people who told us they had nothing made a deliberate choice, and choices have weight. They carry forward. The $62,000 my father-in-law needed for his procedure, the fact that I was the one they called, the fact that I was the one who had to decide. None of that was coincidence. It was the long tail of a decision they made years earlier, finally arriving. I'm not saying the universe runs on a ledger. I'm saying that how we treat people when it costs us something is the truest thing about us, and eventually the truth surfaces. What I had to figure out, in those 2 weeks I asked for, was who I wanted to be when it did. I chose to contribute the $15,000, not because I had forgiven everything, not because I had forgotten Patrick on that bathroom floor at 2 in the morning. I did it because I had spent 2 years watching my husband face something terrifying with more grace than I could have managed, and I wanted to be someone he would have recognized. That is the clearest thing I can tell you about how I made that decision. It wasn't noble. It was just the only choice I could live inside of. But I also said what I needed to say. I told my mother-in-law I knew. I told her I needed her to sit with it. That part mattered just as much as the money. Real clarity is not the same as cruelty. You can tell the truth and still act decently, and doing both at once is harder than doing either one alone. It takes something most people don't talk about, which is the willingness to feel the full weight of a situation and still choose carefully, still think clearly, still act from a place you can respect in the morning. Ren is 6 now. She has her father's eyes and his laugh, and she doesn't know any of this yet. Someday she will be old enough to understand what those years cost us, and what I did afterward. I want her to see that her mother did not become bitter. I want her to see that grief and anger can exist in a person without taking over entirely, that you can be broken open and still rebuild, that staying soft in a world that gives you real reasons to harden, that is not weakness. That is the hardest thing there is. I rolled down the window on the drive home from school drop-off. Even in November, even when it's cold enough that my breath fobs in the car, I do it because the air feels like something and I am still here to feel it. Patrick didn't get that. The least I can do is not waste it.